My mother and father-in-law tore my dress in front of everyone, humiliating me and calling me a gold digger, unworthy of their son. No one knew at that moment, but my father had seen everything. As he quietly approached, he was ready to show them who I really was. Everyone froze in shock, completely speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to write in the comments which country you're from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. The Montgomery estate stood like a fortress of wealth against the amber glow of the twilight sky, its marble facade shimmering under the soft lights of manicured gardens. Inside, the grand ballroom was a vision of opulence, with crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light across the polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of roses, expensive perfume, and the faint tang of champagne, mingling with the low hum of high society chatter. I, Clara Evans, stood at the center of this glittering world, my fingers trembling as they traced the delicate crimson silk of my dress. It wasn't just a gown, it was my masterpiece, months in the making, each stitch a testament to my dreams of becoming a renowned fashion designer. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, the night Ethan Montgomery, my fiancé, and I announced our engagement to his prestigious family and their elite circle. But as I caught the icy, appraising stares of my mother-in-law, Vivian Montgomery, and my father-in-law, Richard, a knot of dread tightened in my chest, threatening to unravel my carefully composed facade. Ethan's hand found mine, his warm fingers intertwining with my cold ones, grounding me against the rising tide of nerves. His hazel eyes sparkled with reassurance, and his voice was a soft anchor in the storm. "You're breathtaking, Clara," he whispered, brushing a stray lock of chestnut hair from my face. "They'll come around. Just be yourself." I forced a smile, clinging to his words like a lifeline. Ethan was my rock, the man who saw past my modest upbringing to the woman I was, fierce, creative, determined. He'd fallen in love with me not for wealth or status, but for my passion, my quiet strength, my refusal to bend under pressure. But his parents were a different story. To Vivian and Richard, I was an intruder, a small-town girl from a nondescript suburb who'd somehow ensnared their golden son, heir to the Montgomery Empire, a sprawling conglomerate of real estate, technology, and luxury brands that dominated the city's skyline and economy. They didn't know the real me, and I hadn't wanted to flaunt it. Not yet. I'd hoped my love for Ethan would be enough to bridge the chasm between our worlds, that my sincerity would soften their hearts. But as the evening unfolded, it became painfully clear that hope was naive. The night had been orchestrated with ruthless precision by Vivian, a woman whose elegance was a polished mask for her need to control every detail. The Montgomery estate, perched on the outskirts of the city, was a monument to their wealth, with its soaring ceilings, gold-trimmed walls, and staff who moved like silent ghosts, anticipating every guest's need. They'd insisted on hosting the engagement party here, a power move to remind me of my place, an outsider in their gilded world. I'd agreed, not out of weakness, but because I wanted to prove I could hold my own without losing myself. I'd spent weeks preparing, perfecting my speech, ensuring every detail of my appearance was flawless. My crimson dress, with its flowing lines, intricate embroidery, and subtle shimmer was my pride, a symbol of my talent and my refusal to be defined by their standards. I'd poured my heart into it, sketching late into the night, stitching until my fingers ached, dreaming of the day my designs would grace runways in Paris and Milan. But the Montgomerys had other plans. The evening began with subtle barbs, each one sharper than the last. During the cocktail hour, Vivian's voice cut through the chatter as she spoke to her friend Margot, a diamond-encrusted socialite with a laugh like breaking glass. "Clara's from such a quaint background, isn't she?" Vivian said, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's almost charming how she tries to keep up." Margot tittered, her eyes flicking to me, and I felt the gazes of the guests, bankers, CEOs, old money heirs, dissecting my every move. I sipped my champagne, forcing a smile, but the words stung like a slap. I'd grown up in a modest house, raised by a single father who valued hard work over flash, but I'd never felt ashamed of it until now. Richard was less discreet. Over dinner, as I sat beside Ethan at the long mahogany table laden with crystal and silver, he leaned forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow. "So, Clara," he said, his voice booming across the room, "what exactly do you bring to this family? Besides, of course, your affection for our son?" The table fell silent, forks pausing midair, eyes darting to me. Ethan's grip on my hand tightened, his jaw clenching, but I kept my composure, meeting Richard's gaze with a steady one of my own. "I bring myself, Mr. Montgomery," I said evenly, my voice clear despite the tremor in my chest. "My love for Ethan, my values, and my work. I hope that's enough." His grunt was dismissive, and Vivian's lips curled into a smirk. "Love," she murmured, as if tasting a bitter wine. "How quaint." The guests chuckled, and my cheeks burned, but I held my head high, focusing on Ethan's warmth beside me. He leaned close, whispering, "You're doing great. They're just testing you." I wanted to believe him, but the tension grew as the night wore on. The guests, at least, seemed charmed by our story, a whirlwind romance that had blossomed despite our different worlds. Ethan, with his easy charm and sharp mind, was the perfect bridge between us, and I clung to the hope that his parents would eventually see me through his eyes. But their disdain was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing hour, fueled by their belief that I was a gold digger, a nobody clawing her way into their empire. There was another shadow in the room, one I hadn't anticipated. Elise Varon, a rival designer who'd been circling Ethan's social circle for years. Elise was everything the Montgomerys admired: polished, connected, and ruthless. Her sleek black gown hugged her frame, and her smile was a blade, sharp and calculated. She'd been a guest at Vivian's insistence, and her presence felt like a deliberate jab. I'd crossed paths with Elise before, at a local fashion event where she'd dismissed my work as cute and amateur. Now, as she mingled with the guests, her eyes locked onto mine, a smirk playing on her lips. I knew she was waiting for me to falter, to give her an opening to prove I didn't belong. Then came the moment that shattered everything. As the band struck up a soft waltz, Ethan and I were called to the center of the ballroom for a toast. My heart pounded, but I was ready. I'd rehearsed my words 100 times, a simple thank you to the guests for celebrating our love. I stepped forward, the crimson dress catching the light, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. But before I could speak, Vivian rose from her seat, her wineglass raised like a scepter. The room hushed, all eyes on her. "A toast?" she said, her voice sharp and mocking, cutting through the silence like a knife. "To what, exactly? To a woman who thinks she can waltz into our family with nothing but a pretty face and a cheap dress?" Her words sliced through the air, each one a deliberate cut. The guests gasped, their murmurs rippling like a wave. My breath caught, my mind racing for a response, but the humiliation was paralyzing. Richard stood, his presence imposing, his eyes locked on me with undisguised contempt. "She's a gold digger, plain and simple," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. "Unworthy of our son. Look at her, parading around in that tacky gown, pretending to belong among us." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring with cruel curiosity. Elise Varen's smirk widened, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. I clutched my glass, my knuckles white, as the room spun around me. Ethan lunged forward, his voice trembling with rage. "Mother, father, that's enough!" But Vivian wasn't finished. She strode toward me, her heels clicking like a predator's claws on the marble floor. Her manicured nails glinted as she grabbed the sleeve of my dress. "This rag," she hissed, her eyes gleaming with malice, "is an insult to our name." With a swift, vicious tug, she tore the fabric. The sound of ripping silk was like a gunshot, exposing my shoulder and collarbone. Richard joined her, grabbing the other side, his thick fingers yanking until the delicate seams gave way. The dress hung in tatters, and I stood there, exposed, my heart pounding as the crowd gasped and whispered. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Vivian's laughter rang out, cold and triumphant. "You'll never be one of us, Clara," she spat, stepping back to admire her work. Elisa's laugh joined hers, a sharp, mocking echo that cut deeper than the torn silk. Ethan was at my side in an instant, draping his jacket over my shoulders, his voice shaking with fury. "How dare you!" he shouted. "She's my fiancée!" But the damage was done. The guests stared, some with pity, others with amusement. I wanted to run, to disappear into the night and never face these people again. My dreams, my dignity, lay in ruins with the torn silk at my feet. I felt the weight of every eye, every whisper, every judgment, and for a moment, I wondered if they were right, if I was nothing more than an imposter in their world. But then I saw him, my father, James Evans, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. His weathered face was calm, but his eyes burned with a fire I'd seen only a few times in my life, a quiet intensity that spoke of unshakable resolve. He'd been there all evening, unnoticed by the Montgomerys, who hadn't bothered to acknowledge the man in the simple gray suit among their glittering guests. My father was not a man of wealth or status, at least not in the way the Montgomerys measured it. He was a retired engineer, a widower who'd raised me alone after my mother's death when I was 10. But he was also something more, something they could never have imagined. And as he stepped forward, the room seemed to shrink around him, his presence a quiet force that commanded attention. "Clara," he said, his voice low but resonant, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Step back." I obeyed, my heart racing as I clutched Ethan's jacket around me. The guests parted, their eyes darting between my father and the Montgomerys, who stood smugly, unaware of the storm about to break. Vivian scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. "And who are you? Her nobody father, come to defend his little leech?" The crowd tittered, and Elise's laughter rang out again, sharp and cruel. But my father didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver through me. "You think you know Clara," he said, his voice steady but laced with steel. "You think you know me, but you don't know anything." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered leather notebook, its edges frayed from years of use. The room watched, confused, as he opened it and began to read. "In 1998, I patented a technology that revolutionized renewable energy storage, a compact, efficient system that made solar and wind power viable on a global scale. In 2005, I sold that patent to a company you might recognize, Montgomery Enterprises." The name landed like a thunderclap. Richard's smug expression faltered, his ruddy face paling. Vivian's wine glass trembled in her hand, the liquid sloshing dangerously. Elise's smirk vanished, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the shift in the room. My father continued, his voice unwavering. "That patent made your family billions. It funded this estate, your private jets, your entire empire. And I never asked for a cent beyond the initial sale. I didn't need to, because I have something you'll never understand: dignity." The guests gasped, their whispers growing frantic. Ethan's jaw dropped, his eyes darting to me in shock. I hadn't told him, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for my father's achievements. I'd grown up in a modest house, my father teaching me the value of hard work and humility. He'd never flaunted his genius, choosing a simple life over the spotlight after my mother's death left him to raise me alone. He'd been a quiet hero, pouring his brilliance into his work and his love into me, never seeking recognition. I'd followed his example, keeping my own ambitions quiet, building my fashion line in secret while working a day job as a graphic designer to pay the bills. But my father wasn't done. He turned to Vivian, his gaze piercing. "You called my daughter a gold digger. You tore her dress, humiliated her in front of your friends. So let me tell you who Clara really is." He gestured to me, his eyes softening with pride. "Clara designed that dress herself. Every stitch, every fold was her creation. She's a brilliant artist, a creator who's been quietly building her own fashion line. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to buy your approval. But since you've forced my hand, let's make things clear." He pulled out his phone and projected an image onto the ballroom wall, a sleek, professional website showcasing my designs. The crowd murmured as they saw the elegant gowns, the intricate patterns, the glowing reviews from fashion critics in Paris, Milan, and New York. "Her work has been featured in international shows," my father said. "She's been offered partnerships by brands you wear, Vivian. But she wanted to stand on her own, without my name or my money." The room was deathly silent now. Vivian's face was ashen, her lips parted in shock. Richard looked like he'd been struck, his hands clenched at his sides. Elise's expression was unreadable, but her fingers tightened around her glass, betraying her unease. My father stepped closer to the Montgomerys, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You thought you could break my daughter, but you don't know strength. You don't know her." He turned to the crowd, his presence commanding every eye. "And one more thing. That patent I sold you, it had a clause you clearly didn't read closely. If Montgomery Enterprises ever acts against the interests of my family, I retain the right to reclaim it. All of it." The room erupted in gasps. Richard stammered, "That's impossible. Our lawyers would never—" "Your lawyers missed it," my father said coolly, flipping to a page in his notebook marked with a faded signature. "I have the original contract right here. You can check it. Or you can apologize to my daughter. Right now." The Montgomerys stood frozen, their empire teetering on the edge of ruin. The guests watched, breathless, as Vivian's pride battled her fear. Finally, she choked out, "Clara, we didn't know." "That's not an apology," my father said sharply. "Try again." Richard cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "We're sorry, Clara. We misjudged you. We were wrong." I stepped forward, the torn dress still clinging to me, but I felt taller than ever. Ethan's jacket was warm around my shoulders, but it was my own strength that held me up now. "You didn't just misjudge me," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "You tried to destroy me. You humiliated me in front of everyone, thinking I was nothing. But I'm not here for your approval. I'm here for Ethan. And if you can't accept that, you'll lose him too." Ethan wrapped his arm around me, his face a mix of awe and pride. "She's right," he said, turning to his parents. "Clara is my future. I love her for who she is, not for what you think she should be. If you can't respect her, you're no family of mine." The crowd buzzed with whispers, some guests nodding in approval, others still reeling from the revelations. Among them was my best friend, Lila, who'd been watching from the sidelines. She'd insisted on coming tonight, despite my protests, knowing I'd need an ally in this lion's den. Now her eyes gleamed with determination as she slipped her phone from her purse, discreetly recording the scene. I caught her gaze, and she gave me a subtle nod, a promise that this moment wouldn't be forgotten. Lila had always been my fiercest supporter, a graphic designer like me, but with a knack for social media strategy. She'd been the one to push me to launch my fashion line online, and I knew she was already planning how to turn this night into a triumph. My father wasn't finished. He looked at Vivian and Richard, his eyes blazing. "You have 1 week to make this right. A public apology, a donation to Clara's charity for aspiring designers, and a promise to never interfere in her life again. Or I'll take back what's mine, and I'll make sure the world knows why." He turned to me, his voice softening. "Clara, let's go." As we walked out, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with a mix of shock, respect, and curiosity. Ethan held my hand tightly, his presence a steady comfort. My father walked beside us, his quiet strength a reminder of where I'd come from. The cool night air hit my face as we stepped outside, and for the first time that night, I felt free. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Lila, true to her word, had uploaded the video to social media, where it went viral overnight, amassing millions of views. Headlines screamed, "Montgomery Empire shaken by hidden truths at engagement party." Fashion blogs and news outlets picked up the story, praising my designs and dissecting the Montgomerys' fall from grace. My fashion line, Clara Evans Designs, exploded with attention, orders flooding in from boutiques and influencers who'd seen my work projected on that ballroom wall. Elise Varone, caught off guard by the sudden spotlight on me, issued a statement praising my emerging talent. But her words rang hollow, a desperate attempt to save face. Vivian and Richard issued a groveling public apology, their faces strained as they stood before cameras, pledging a substantial donation to my charity for aspiring designers. But the real victory wasn't their humiliation or my sudden fame. It was the quiet moment a week later when my father and I sat in his modest living room, sipping tea as we always had. He looked at me, his eyes crinkling with pride. "You've always been enough, Clara," he said. "You never needed their approval, or mine, to shine. But I'm glad I could remind them who you are." I hugged him, tears in my eyes. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Ethan joined us later, his commitment to me stronger than ever. He distanced himself from his parents, choosing our future over their control. Together, we planned a new engagement party, one we'd host ourselves, surrounded by people who loved us for who we were, not what we represented. Lila was there too, her infectious energy lighting up the room as she toasted to Clara's triumph over the snobs. As I sat there, sketching a new dress design, I realized something. The torn gown, the humiliation, the confrontation, they hadn't broken me. They'd revealed me. And in that revelation, I'd found my voice, my strength, and the family that truly mattered.